I can't see everybody. Let me see. 3, 4. Okay. I saw Jen come in. It's Dave here? I didn't see him.
Yeah.
He's on the list. Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. And Jessica? I didn't see her either.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Would someone move item 1.02?
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Crandall.
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Mr. Cordone.
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville.
Yes. Mrs. Abelgore,
I was
yes.
going to say Mrs. Abelgore. I didn't hear Mrs. Abelgore. I just did.
And I don't see her. Oh, there she is.
Right
Okay.
here.
Sorry.
It's okay.
All right. This brings us to item 1.03, which would normally be our public forum. And as most of you that are viewing know, you can reach out to the board by emailing us at clerk@fulton.cnyric.org. You can find that address on the district website if you didn't get it down. And if you email every board member receives it at the same time. Item 1.04. Regular minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Crandall.
Yes.
Mr. Cordone.
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Mrs. Abelgore.
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
And Mrs. Mainville.
Yes.
Item 1.05 to approve the minutes from our special meeting.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Crandall.
Yes.
Mr. Cordone.
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Mrs. Abelgore.
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville.
Yes.
All right. Are there any questions with regard to any of the upcoming meetings listed under President's Report? If there's no questions, I'm going to ask Superintendent Polvino to give us an update. He was coming back at this meeting to update us on his plan for safety protocols for when we return to in-person meetings.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm just trying to find what I'm looking for here. There it is. Hopefully it'll show there in a second. At the last meeting, I was going through the minutes. One of the things that had been asked, there was a discussion with respect to if we were to return to in-person meetings. There was legislation today. I don't know if you saw it, 5:30 today. There was legislation passed, but going to the governor about extending virtual meetings if boards chose to do so. At the last meeting, you asked that I return. So on your, Ms. Griffin, can you see the screen? I don't know what you guys are seeing. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. So what I did, this is a draft that I put together for discussion and feedback. It just references the August 27th and November 24th New York State Health Commissioner's determination. There's a note on there, and parts of this would all be blown up and placed at the entrance. So as people will be entering to come to a board meeting, if that were the expectation, this would be on probably a half sheet chart paper type thing, all printed out nicely, really conveying that. It also, this was a component where it actually came out in the last, I want to say 48 to 72 hours with respect to this part right here. There was an issue in Nassau County, and it says that officers take the oath. So we have to follow the state. What it does is it reinforces following all expectations for New York State, including face covering. Felt that would be an important component because that just recently came out. And our commissioner on January 6th, and again, I would have these all on a nicely printed document that would be hanging at our entries for meetings. And it also it talks about under the public health law, what she reinforced, our commissioner, on January 6th and referenced it. As far as the plan, what would happen is, for the board's consideration as we're making that determination, does that designated single point of entry for all Board of Education meetings? The superintendent or the SRO will contact the Fulton Police Chief prior to all board meetings to discuss any anticipated issues and awareness that police are made aware that they'll be contacted in the event of any disturbances, and a plan would be agreed upon. So, for example, if the Fulton Police Department were running short, part of that conversation would be, are there any off duty that would be interested in working that evening? If not, we could make that connection also to the sheriffs or the troopers. That would be so we would have a plan in our minds prior to the meeting going in, just so we had a strategy that we could call upon and feel comfortable with. Posted list of expectations at the entry. There would be no symptoms or illness. That temperature would be taken upon entry. Mask wearing is required at all times. The statement here that you see is all students, personnel, teachers, administrators, contractors, and visitors must wear masks at all times indoors, regardless of vaccination status, would be on that sheet. We have the posting of the Board of Education expectations for public forum. And I will share this document with the board after, but we have those listed here below, and I can go through those. But these are what are listed at our board meetings as present. So I can go back to those in a moment. And we'll see those in just a moment. There'd be the sign-in. So what we would do, just like we did when we have visitors coming into the buildings, which we did before, we've been just checking them in, but we used to have a sign-in sheet. We go into that sign-in and really an attestation that they understand what our expectations are when they enter. So that would be the sign-in at entry. Failure to follow those expectations would result in the individual being asked to leave. If the individual refuses, then they would be removed by the SRO and or the security in charge with trespassing. Would be the most extensive if they chose not to either comply or leave. The single entry would have the SRO. There was a question about expenditure. I would ask that our SRO is at each one of those meetings, and at least one event security person. Those of you that are familiar with our athletics, and each year our board approves event security at $50 per event. So drop back a little bit here. Currently, our SRO is contracted to 190 days or 1,520 hours. You notice that I did figure that out, comes out to $29.60 per hour. So a 2-hour meeting would cost at minimum $59.20 for the SRO unless we allocated it within our hours, and $50 for each security per person. So therefore, a 2-hour meeting would be $109.60 at minimum. For a 2-hour meeting, and adding off-duty officers would be in accordance with an agreement with the full police department. So if we were to add police department current force members that maybe are off duty, for example, we would have to work with the police department and figure out that hourly wage. We can monitor those hours and the $15.20 to see how that could work for our SRO. In addition, there'd be custodial services for setup, breakdown of the space, and cleaning. Board seating would be at 6 feet between our members, all are masked. The audience would be set at 6 feet, as you notice what we've been doing. And the junior student in residence member will be provided designated location, ensuring distancing. The superintendent and the board president will be positioned to have a full view. That was an issue we had before. So we would have to be changed our seating so that we can see everybody in the room. That the current seating didn't allow us necessarily to see, other than to look around the corner, if you will, to see everything. And then final safety plan will be posted on the FCSD website. So we would communicate all of this information. It would be available on our website and posted at our entry at the meeting. And then it would go out with our official a notice of meetings, which we have to do by law. And then a debrief meeting with the superintendent, at minimum, superintendent, board president, obviously any other board members that may be interested, as long as we don't have a quorum. SRO and any other designated individuals would be scheduled after each meeting to discuss what went well and any necessary adjustments. And then any changes would be communicated to board members and then the community. Just a reminder, these are our public forum guidance. So we already had a single point of entry talking about the commissioner's regulations. And then we have information with respect to pre-registration at meetings is still available. And then the following guidance. And then I'm not going to read all the bullets, but these are the bullets that are posted on our right next to the sign-in sheet for those who would wish to speak with the board. So that's all of here. I think one of the pieces on here, I think it reminds everybody that we are to be cordial to one another, no personal attacks. It's really to have a forum where thoughts and perspectives are shared. Obviously, we're in a world right now where there's a lot of anxieties, frustrations, a lot of things on people's minds. You often heard the word, we got to continue to work on kindness and respect for one another. I think it's a national phenomenon. It's not anything unique to Fulton. Those are all identified in here. And then an indication that the agendas are now electric. And then I just put the virtual meetings law, which really has nothing to do with the presentation, but just that it was reauthorized, but that this extension expires 1/15 for virtual meetings. However, at the beginning of the meeting, or at the beginning of this update, I shared that this afternoon at 5:22, we received some piece of legislation from Ms. Grasso from NISBA, and indicating that there's been legislation put forward to the governor to extend that option to boards of education. That's a lot. Are there any questions? And I'll stop presenting, or I can leave it up there.
I actually have some questions. So I'm wondering what, first of all, our city government is doing. My concern is that, and I totally believe that we need to ensure safety of everybody. But I'm just wondering what other local governments are doing. I don't want us to overshoot, because it seems to me like we could then be sending a message that we're not open to the community to receive their input, to receive their participation in government, their presence. And I'm concerned about that. You outlined, certainly measures that can be taken if people violate our visitor code of conduct as it already stood. But we also know that the guidance is changing day to day surrounding the pandemic. I'm aware that, from the governor today that, we're not contact tracing any longer. The health departments are. So it seems that things are getting more lax, and our message might be to our community that we're being more strict. So I'm concerned about striking that balance.
Just writing it all down, Dave. That's what I'm doing. You know what I'm doing. So thank you.
I just wanted to say, Dave, there's one piece that we have incumbent on us that other groups don't, and we are required to make certain that our students are safe. And that is not a requirement for anybody else that holds a meeting.
I think everybody has to be safe, and I
But
don't
they
think that
have- it's not a written.
But I
it's
don't
not a
think
written
that
requirement.
I would not want us to, and we don't have students at every meeting. So I
We
just
have
want to
one.
ensure the public, that we are approachable, that we are meeting per open meetings laws, and that may change or not on the 15th.
Right.
Brian said, but I just want us to be mindful of that, because I think it sends a different message. And I do want us to kind of be mindful of other municipalities that are held to the same law for meeting in public, because I think that's important. I think that there's a great desire for our community and our constituency, and I think the broader population to return to quote unquote normal as soon as possible. And I think we had one meeting where there was perhaps an issue that challenged us, but I don't think we should judge that, but that the future will play out the same way. I appreciate being proactive, but again, I don't want us to overshoot, because I think the guidance is all shifting and changing. It is, I'm receiving daily updates from my own school district where I work. And things are more and more lax and becoming more closer to normal. So I just want us to be mindful of that and not become so restrictive that it's going to come back to be perceived differently by this board, or for this board.
And I appreciate that, about not being too harsh. But again, the one thing that hasn't changed, I have not, and if it has, then you can share with me, but I have not seen any change with regard to our obligation to keep our students protected. And that came from state ed, that we have that obligation. Students more so than anybody. In particular, it was mentioned students.
But
So
we could always,
we have won every meeting.
but we could always move to adjourn the meeting. Ultimately, if there were ever, it's like you're not going to stay in a burning building. So I think rather than send a message where we're not approachable, we're not accessible, we know that we can adjourn a meeting. And if that was that was our norm and that was our expectation, we'd be keeping our students safe, because ultimately there's a minute duration of exposure in any situation, as Brian knows, with contact tracing, that, if you don't exceed it, you don't have to worry. And I do think that we all need to be safe, but I have to be honest and say that I don't feel threatened by my community.
Well, it wasn't our community that created the problem. So that's part of the issue.
But we are putting up a barrier for our community. And I think that they have to come first. We should have a backup plan to say, if we are infiltrated by people that are not from our community and they're threatening us, then my gosh, of course we should do the safe thing and adjourn the meeting.
Jane, can I ask you a question? Do you know how many people we have virtually versus, what we generally have in the audience? Because I know in the audience, we hardly have any people. Anyways, in the last 6 years that I've been here.
I can get a report. Tim Wilson can probably run a report.
That would be great. I think we need to put that in perspective too. I mean, it's not like we're not allowing the public to listen or be there, because we are. So,
but they can't address us, I guess, is my concern.
They can address us anyways. Dave, you know that. We cannot answer a question.
No, they can speak. They can speak publicly about their concerns. We don't have to respond. That's not what we do in the moment. But I think that's the purpose of open meetings law, is allow them to present any concern they have. Right now, maybe the email measure is a variable is a barrier for people. I don't know, but I just think that I think we need to just be mindful that things are moving forward. We're coming out of a pandemic into an endemic, and or endemic, whichever is the appropriate prefix. And I just want us to be mindful of that.
I certainly, agree with parts of what you're saying, but I think at this point we are at a height with this pandemic, and it makes me a little nervous to go into a lot of crowds. But again, I'm only one person.
I'm very thankful that we're being so thorough, and I think that it's easier to take away than it is to add. And by having all of the parts there now, and we are ready for anything. If we have to take away 3 feet apart, or if we have to take away masks or whatever it seems to be at that point, then it's easier to take away than to add, I think. So I think we're in a good place if we agree that we want to go public. I'm personally, I feel like we are serving the public. We are serving students. We're asking the students to be in school, and teachers, and it's not being spread in school that I really know of. We're taking the appropriate measures, and as long as we abide by the rules and regulations, then I think we've done a pretty good job.
I agree. And I think that just from the short period of time that I've been with this board, I've received very few emails to, address situations, but we have had a decent amount of people attend the meetings and voice some of their concerns. And I think that we're still live, so people can still tune in if they don't, want to come. But I do, again, we're asking our kids to be in person, and I agree. Like we should be in person and at least try it out and see how it goes. Trying to get back to where we were before just kind of shooting it down because we have the go ahead to stay virtual.
Any other thoughts? Okay.
Who's going to make the determination what we do, I guess?
What is there any other thoughts from the board? I mean, again,
Right.
I serve the board, so I work for you. But
We're-
but what I would say is the president and I guess that's what we did in the fall. But I guess I want to make sure.
Yeah.
Who else? Jen, Jess, Lynn, Dave, Brenda. Or is there any other people that haven't spoke yet that have any points of view on this? I guess.
I just wonder if perhaps we should wait for the governor's decision on the legislation that we learned about today.
Yeah, I think we should wait for the governor's decision and then talk about it some more. We just have to also keep in mind that the extra money that you incorporated in that for having the extra security there too, that's something we might want to think about as we're going into this budget season.
And the cleaning that's going to be involved because we're all in person.
Well, the one thing I'm concerned about, and I just want to state this up front, is we've had some issues with staffing and custodial staffing. So if that could become an issue, perhaps not. And the only other thing that could be an issue is if enough of us aren't able to attend. So let's say, for example, I'm having symptoms and I can't come. And then somebody else was scheduled not to come because they had a commitment they had to meet. And then a couple other people don't feel well. That is my only concern. And I can't just flip on a dime to have a meeting. So we can't just go from in-person to remote meeting. So,
Can we get a legal guidance rather, Brian, on those scenarios that Robin laid out for us? Because I know that city has worked around those where some have been virtual, some members have participated virtually, and the majority of the board has been physically present.
we can do that, but you can only be virtual, David, if you, Jean has to advertise where I'm at. Like if I'm at home, I have to be willing to open my door. And
I think that was waived. I think that was waived currently under the situation.
We just found out for Lynn. No, Lynn has to, when she leaves, she has to tell Jean where she's going to be. It has to be advertised with us where we're going to be in person. And she has to provide handicap accessibility to wherever she's located.
Is that after the 15th when
Yes.
the governor? Okay. So
Yeah.
under the current, I guess what I'm referring to is the current arrangement. I'm assuming that it's going to be extended. I would expect the governor would do that.
Yeah, we
So
got
then
the
my-
guidance that Robin's, because we anticipate, we had that question too, David. It's a great question. We did get, and that was the guidance that we got, that you,
Right.
even though if we're running, if I hate to use the term, I'm not gonna, it's hybrid's what it is. It's a meeting where some are in person and others aren't. I don't like the word, but I'll find a different one. But the idea was we wanted to make sure that, you know, we always want to make sure if we can have all 7 at every meeting, that's the best thing we can ever have happen.
Right.
And if we can use technology in a way that's in accordance with open meetings law and being able to do that and all the requirements that required to do so, then obviously I think, you know, we continue to try to be as transparent as possible here in Fulton. You know, there are districts that don't necessarily even they don't even do them there, even though they're in person again, they've stopped doing, you know, the virtual live stream, which takes out a lot of people who enjoy watching our meetings and learning about our community, what we're doing here. So I think the idea is for us to provide as much opportunity and access for our community as possible. And
So the only thing I'm saying right now is, and I need you to think about it. So, again, if COVID or the flu, it's that season. So if we're going to see sickness, this is the time of year we're going to see it. And with Lynn being able to do virtual, that's a great help. That really is significantly a great help to us because that helps us make sure that we have a quorum. So that's all I need you to consider. But we can't flip once we advertise for in-person meeting. And should we find out that people are symptomatic and feel like they can't come, we can't go from that to remote. We have to go back, and Jean would have to advertise again, and it would have to be advertised for a remote meeting. That's all I'm saying. Not that it's not doable. I just want you to understand that that's how it would work. Because I know some people thought that we could just do one or the other. And that's not the case. It has to be, Jean has to be specific. I think you're right there, Jean. You have to be specific when you put the ad in the paper.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Maybe I need to get some guidance, just that if we're going to continue to live stream it anyway, does that give us the flexibility that we are doing both at all times, which would force us to make sure we can do both. So if we have a technology problem that night, I guess it would create a problem.
Yes, because it's all about the advertising for the public's benefit.
Yep. So what
I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because
Yep.
I've been reading everything I get my hands on to make sure that I get it right, and again, meet the expectations of the public. So,
How many people have to be present physically to hold the board meeting? Like if we were going to have, like, if we were to say, let's say 6 of us were able to be there physically for the meeting, and then a couple of people, we were down to 4, let's just say. So we have 3 virtual. Is that okay, since we're live streaming? Is that something that has to be?
That's okay. We're going to need 4 people, and it doesn't matter. The combination doesn't matter, what the in-person versus logging in. What matters is how we advertise.
So if we advertise hybrid every single time.
No, well, Lynn's exact location has to, so your exact location has to be advertised. So Mrs. Perry would need to know where you're logging in from, and you would have to verify that you have handicap accessibility.
And you have to, I think, a week in advance. Am I correct, Jean? Is that when you do it? Yeah. I've already asked.
That's for that hybrid, which is different than remote meetings under COVID law. Now, remote meeting under COVID law, none of that applies.
What if you just went
don't we have to post, Jean, we have to post our meeting 5 it's 5 days in advance.
Right. I'm talking about us being remote. It doesn't apply.
What if the remote people were just in a classroom by themselves at the school?
I think that would be fine under the remote, under current allowances for remote. That would be fine.
But what would the purpose of that be?
Well, you'd be by yourself, so you're not being exposed to.
I'm not going to be down. I'm going to be out of town. So I've already checked. We got legally what I could do, because I had asked before I ran the last time. Everyone was aware that I would be gone a couple months during the winter. So we got this kind of worked out. To figure out how we were going to do this. So.
But if it were anybody else,
Lynn is going to be at One Lions Way in
That's
blah, 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 at blah, 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 and a chair will be set up in the front lawn.
That's right.
As
right.
It's on the porch.
Right.
Well, the case may be.
That's if we return back to normal meeting processes and we're not doing the COVID remote. COVID remote changes everything.
That's
I'm going to be gone too.
Right.
So on our next meeting, I'm going to join Lynn, and we're going to do it together. That way, just probably easier.
At this point, do we want to set up in anticipation of not hearing from the governor in the next hour, that we would have our next meeting would be the 25th? Do we want to? We would have the legislation. Well, she'd have to sign by the 15th. So
I say we just table it until the next meeting.
So let me ask you this: do you want the next meeting I have to do in person, unless you tell me I can go ahead and do virtual if the governor passes it before then? So what is your pleasure? I need to know what it is you would like me to do at this point.
I say if the governor has extended it, we stick to what we're doing until we figure out what we want to do from there. So you would stay in virtual mode if the governor extends it. If we're tabling it to the next meeting.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying. Does everybody understand what Brenda's proposing? Mm-hmm. Staying virtual for the next meeting if it's allowed, if it's allowed, and then deciding at that meeting how we want to proceed. That's
I agree.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to say. If you think, have a question or something pops in your head, please let me or Brian know so that we can get answers back to folks, and we can be prepared to make a decision at our next meeting, however it falls. So we will be in person unless the governor extends, and then if the governor does, we will be virtual and we'll continue this discussion. We're good? Okay, Brian, thank you for the homework that you did.
You're welcome.
I
And
know.
if you have
I
any
appreciate
feedback,
it.
I will attach it to tomorrow's daily updates so you can actually see it and reference it and
I
digest it a
appreciate
bit.
that. And Mrs. Perry, thank you. Mrs. Perry did some legwork also, making certain of what had to happen in order to make all of this work, also to make things work for Tim and don't say it, Lynn. Got it. Jeez. All right. So on to the next topic. And it's Brian. I'm turning the meeting over to you.
Okay. Just writing quickly here. Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to start off, and I'll talk a little bit more just about where we're status as a district and things like that with the COVID testing and protocol in the fourth presentation tonight. But tonight, we want to continue just our recognition of staff for our clerical and our aides, the unsung heroes of the district. You know, oftentimes, you know, for me, Miss Perry she tells me where to go, what I need to do, gets me where I need to go. I know that our clerical do amazing things behind the scenes and really have been stepping up. A number of our clerical help with calls in the evenings with Mr. L's around quarantines and isolations. And we've got others that are right there when I arrive at a building in the morning. And there they are side by side with the principals figuring out the coverage for the day. Those of you that are in educational settings, I'm sure you see it when you walk into your buildings as they're piecing the jigsaw puzzle of the day together that we're addressing now. Just doing an outstanding job. Our clerical has continued to be right there doing an outstanding job, and our aides they're there for everything. We adjust. They've during COVID, they've done cleaning. They've helped with wiping down door handles and all those kinds of things early on. And they often are plugged into classrooms and supporting kids through lunches and arrivals and dismissals, all of the pieces of the puzzle. And they're quiet heroes behind the scenes that are constantly right there providing supports and often doing many tasks that seem small, but all those small components add up into very large key elements of each and every day. So I just wanted to extend appreciation for our clerical and our teacher aides. You're doing an outstanding job. Thank you. Everything that you do. You know, I see a group out here every morning directing traffic here at the junior high. I mean, you name it, they step up and they do what we ask, and truly appreciate that. Jerry, is there anything you'd add to that, or is that kind of hitting it right? Kind of saying it really a heartfelt thank you to all of our faculty and staff and tonight clerical aides. Jerry didn't chime in, so I think I'm all right. So thank you.
Wow.
All right. Second this evening is our strategic coherence plan and our continued focus on different aspects as we head into the budget process, because when we talk about budget parameters next week at our budget workshop, it really comes back. If you look at our parameters last year, everything tied back to our strategic coherence plan. Everything with our federal funds ties back to our strategic coherence plan. Our budget process, because we tied it back to the strategic coherence plan last year, kept things straight and narrow through a very difficult time as we were developing a budget. And I believe that budget is allowing us, coupled with the federal, to do some creative, innovative ways to get kids back engaged in schools and providing our staff with the supports and resources that they need to be able to do that. So Mr. Carroll, if you want to present along with, I see you have a couple of friends with you this evening to help to do that. So
we do.
Strategic Coherence Area Instruction this evening. Mr. Carroll.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Polvino. So yes, in this next segment of our strategic coherence plan reports, we'll be focusing on the area of instruction. Again, we remind you that the plan was developed as the vehicle for bringing us to realize our district's mission and our vision. Going back 4 years now, we spent the better part of a full year with a very representative group of stakeholders, beginning with our mission and vision, reaffirming both of those, and determining the action steps in the form of our strategic coherence plan that would get us to realizing those for our students. Coherence is a concept that we adopted. This is a concept that's been researched by his name is Michael Fullen, an educational researcher, and he provides a framework for us that really guides the development of all our plans and initiatives. It involves 4 main components that we apply in each of the areas of our coherence plan. One is focusing direction. In other words, staying cued into these 6 main areas and not being distracted by shiny objects, which is a term that we use quite frequently in planning. Next, developing and cultivating collaborative cultures, which is central to the way we work. Our PLCs, or professional learning communities, are the biggest example of this. Securing accountability or co-accountability, so that there's a recognition that all of our work, that we all depend on each other for realizing these goals for our students. And finally, deepening learning, which is really central to tonight's focus on instruction. Brings us to our focus on instruction. Following this presentation, we have 2 more in this series, one on social emotional developmental health, and finally family engagement. So in the area of instruction, this is where our district really articulates our instructional vision. And it was important to that original steering committee who developed the plan that we set student-centered goals to measure our progress. It's really kind of a proof is in the pudding approach. It's only engaging instruction if our students tell us that it is. So in that way, we use our student voice survey results to measure how we're doing with our efforts to provide engaging instruction for all of our students. And we ask our students 3 questions in relation to this area. Are classes interesting, and do they keep your attention? Do you often work with partners or in groups? And does your teacher explain things in different ways so that all students can learn? Excuse me. Next, we'll take a look at how those federal stimulus funds have really helped to bolster our efforts in this area. As you can see in the breakdown here, we have devoted 22%, or approximately $2.6 million towards the area of instruction. This allocation includes several new student-facing positions in the form of additional reading, math interventionists at all levels, as well as additional English as a new language positions. It's also empowered us to strengthen the capacity of the next generation of FCSD teachers with an increase to our instructional coaching team. And it's even allowed us to kind of plant the flag for innovative new instructional approaches with the creation of the interdisciplinary instructional specialist positions. And we'll hear from 2 representatives of that team regarding the great work that they're doing in just a bit. In relation to the federal stimulus funds, it's important to remember that an overarching purpose, charge really for the use of these funds, was for school districts to increase our capacity to provide safe in-person instruction, while also addressing students' needs related to the learning loss that's associated with 2 years of interrupted instruction. We've been strategic in how we allocate these funds, and that's allowed us to meet both of those charges. Today, for example, both of the specialists who are with us tonight, Mrs. Reese and Mrs. Rodriguez, Like most of their coach and specialist colleagues played a key role in helping us to stay open for students by providing coverage for uncovered absences. So having them on hand allows us to keep in-person instruction going for kids while also really strengthening the instruction of the future. So related to that instructional vision for the district, our instructional priorities are really the specific place in which we do that. And to speak a little more about the instructional priorities and our initiatives in relation to them, I want to welcome Will Meekum. Will is our Director of Instructional Support Services. Will, welcome.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is always a pleasure to see you, but it is really my pleasure tonight because I get to brag about some of the great work that this board has done over the course of this year. You have appointed some really fantastic individuals, folks that are really dedicated, creative, and innovative, like you've heard before. And I really look forward to turning it over to them at the end of this because although we're using our instructional priorities here, as you see, to get our focusing direction, where the rubber really meets the road is the work that these folks are doing and the impact that it's having in the classroom and on the lives of our scholars. Dan, if you'd go to the next slide. The folks who you have appointed as our instructional coaches and our specialists really have been working hard this year to support teachers and instruction in ways that we aren't always certain how that's going to work out. We are still learning as an organization based on all of the challenges that we faced over the past 2 years, and it has never been more important than now to continue to live that theme of being a learning organization. And our folks who are serving in these roles really do serve in multiple capacities under those titles because they are not just pushing our teaching staff in terms of instruction, but also supporting them, like I said, in a number of ways. This is, in fact, how we are continuing to cultivate that culture of collaboration is through these various positions and these folks who are really living it each and every day. You can go ahead, Dan. The instructional priorities, while they are our guiding force here and allowing us to focus direction, we've got to keep track of where we stand with them each year. And as you know, we have a task force that meets periodically around each of those. And what I've put in front of you today is a breakdown of what our coaches were able to collect the first 2 weeks in October in regards to the evidence towards how we're doing with those instructional priorities. And you can see it broken down here. We were able to complete over 200 classroom visits in those first 2 weeks of October. The task force itself was responsible for providing feedback to myself and our district leadership with regards to how the look for process had functioned in the past. And based on that feedback and our conversations with our PLC facilitators and other teachers, we determined that it had at some times become a burden or a somewhat invasive process. So this year, again, with the folks that you all have appointed, we decided to change. We tweaked the process a little bit. We're no longer calling it a look for process, but we are referring to these as our instructional priorities glances, because it is sort of just a snapshot in time of how we're doing with all of our instructional priorities. Our coaches completed these according to their assigned caseload, and they used this information to then personalize and prioritize professional development for those teachers who are on their caseload. Now, teachers on a caseload can vary from, very first year to very experienced. So it was important for all of our coaches and our specialists as well to have that experience, but also for us to change that process so that we can get a very accurate look at where we stand as a district in terms of the instructional priorities. The second part of this instructional piece in terms of the strategic coherence plan really deals with students being able to engage and feel engaged and be interested in what's happening in their classrooms. We feel that this approach using our interdisciplinary specialists really gives us a leg up in terms of how we're approaching this task and how we can plan moving forward to continue to be a district that prioritizes engagement in the classroom. Our interdisciplinary specialists, we have two of which are here. I'd love to turn it over to them now to speak to you about some of the really interesting and engaging lessons and planning and other things that they've been working on and how that's impacted their work with teachers and the students' work in the classroom. So thank you to Denise and thank you to Jen for being here with us tonight.
Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you again. I know I was here not too long ago, and I talked about how, as interdisciplinary specialists, we've been supporting instruction in small ways, like aligning our essential learning outcomes and developing the website, medium ways like creating common proficiency scales, interdisciplinary lessons, and then there's big ways like large projects or units. And I wanted to share a really cool experience that happened in our 8th grade. One of our teams created an exciting transdisciplinary lesson around the topic of trench warfare. So they're learning about World War I, and the social studies teacher reached out to me and to her team to see if they could support the students learning by creating some sort of lesson that they could all be engaged in: math, science, social studies, English. And in the process, it was really amazing to see what they came up with. The math teacher was able to use this as a reteaching opportunity for slope. Students used graph paper to create their own trench. They were given criteria for what was actually in a trench during World War I, and then they had to draw it on their graph paper and integrate at least 10 lines in which they then had to find the slope. In science, they went on a virtual field trip throughout the Western Front, and they practiced finding the latitude and longitude of coordinates. In ELA, they read an article from their StudySync resource about the experience of a soldier during trench warfare and had to write a news report or develop a graphic novel to share the experience. And in social studies, they read a story called Christmas in the Trenches, and this took place right before Christmas break. So they talked about the Christmas truce and how they stopped fighting for that day, and then they completed a website scavenger hunt. So it was extremely well received by students. I visited every class throughout the whole day, and I started to figure out pretty quickly that they were learning about the topic throughout all of their classes. And as I was going into the rooms, teachers mentioned to me that this was the most engaged they had seen their students all year. And what was really great is they were a little reluctant at first when we talk about interdisciplinary instruction, and there's so much on their plates this year, and they didn't want one more thing to do. But as we got planning, you could really see the excitement in the planning process, the students engaged. And as an instructional coach and a specialist, I honestly haven't seen that this year. It's been a very daunting year for many, and it was nice to see that spark in everybody's eyes again. So I'm excited to work. We have more things coming. We have the other 8th grade team is working on an upcoming transdisciplinary lesson about the Great Molasses Disaster. The 7th grade is working on actually a big way, a unit planning, humanities unit around government. And then recently, a 5th grade instructional coach reached out to me and said her team is really interested in developing something that they can do to try and save instructional time and work together towards those common standards. So it's been really exciting. It's been a bright spot to everything that we've been through over the past couple of years. And I'm really looking forward to see, what's coming up next.
That sounds amazing, Denise. It really excites me, obviously, social studies at heart. So hearing about your trench warfare project just sounds fantastic. So I'm going to give you a little vision at the high school, some of the work that's occurring there. Prior to the break, we did our first cross department meeting. And so we had our English and social studies department meet together. That is the part that I led. And then there was also the math and the science met as well. And it was awesome. So we got into the meeting, I introduced a few things, got them started. They began to really dig into the reading and writing standards, seeing that there's this exact overlap. And so I opened the meeting. Within about 15 minutes, I opened it up for conversation amongst the teachers, and to see those teachers, the English and the social studies, coming together to talk about how they teach their students writing, how they teach their students to close read a document, and really trying to compare and figure out what's best practices to make sure that our students are getting the same message, whether they're sitting in a social studies classroom or an English classroom. Similarly, conversations occurred with math and science as well. We're really starting to look at like 5-week periods and seeing what are we learning in social studies in this 5-week period, what are we learning in English, and how can we merge those two together and support each other and support our students through the learning process. So we're trying to uncover those interdisciplinary connections. So it's great. And we have future meetings as well planned to bring those teams back together.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Denise. I want to point out how appreciative I am and congratulate the specialist. And Denise and Jen are here representing a team that also includes Dan Mainville and Greg Bailey. As a group, the specialists have been able to develop this interdisciplinary attention among the staff without adding. Okay. I hope that came through with what they've just described. They've really been skillful in helping teachers to recognize those common points of learning across subject areas where connections can be made and where there really are opportunities to help our students with their learning by offering some revisiting of topics. I know Denise, when she described the trench warfare project earlier, made the point that really stuck with me, that slope piece from math, in which the students use graph paper to use the slope formula and represent their own trenches. That was a revisiting of instruction that had occurred in a previous unit. So here was an opportunity to come back to a math concept that within the math class wouldn't have been possible just with the normal pacing of how the course goes. They've uncovered multiple opportunities like this at all levels already, and it really is exciting for the future. I wanted, if you haven't made the connection back to when we last saw Jen and Denise at our last meeting, they shared that learning outcomes project in which they're providing leadership with our facilitators and chairs in vertically aligning our learning outcomes for every grade and every subject. That's really the basis for where these learning connections are being made across subject areas. And one final point here, when we say goodnight to Denise and Jen, it'll just be for tonight. We're going to see them again and the other members of their team as well later on in the year. Denise is also involved in her administrative internship as a member of the CNY LVP, and her developing of an interdisciplinary model is her district project as part of her internship. So we will we'll be excited to share with you all what she comes up with and recommends later on in the year as a result of that.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll and Ms. Reese, Ms. Rodriguez, and Mr. Meekum. Thank you for your input. The other piece, if you think back, and I always want to make the threads, we discussed a couple of weeks ago or a couple of meetings ago, I shared that I had participated in a graduation standards meeting with NICET. I had shared that at one of our meetings. when you look at what's being shared or listen to what's being shared at those forums and those opportunities with state ed for feedback from the community, so there's parents and teachers and administrators and such, all contributing students, that the assessments that you see down the road are going to align with the next generation standards. And on top of that, so there's work, obviously all this work is helping reinforce and understand and make those linkages. Also, a lot of the assessments they talked about are interdisciplinary by nature, project-based, they're really trying to get those things that may be part of our kids' future and their graduation requirements. So I think we're approaching this in a very proactive, innovative way. So I wanted to make that link, that this work is actually preparing. I think it's going to lead us toward what the graduation requirements are going to look like down the road. More importantly, even if it doesn't, you have to be able to be a part of a team, interact as part of a team, and think and bring multiple pieces of information together. That's what the world is looking for. And so this also allows our students to be better prepared as they exit our schools and embark on the next part of their lives. Are there any comments or any questions?
I have a question. I'm just wondering, and this is all very exciting, but I want to ask, is this approach allowing for our higher level students to also be challenged? So everyone's being challenged to learn more, because one of the things I heard when we were, for some of our kids on remote, is some of our higher achieving students found it hard to feel challenged. So is that back?
Any of you can respond. My perception is absolutely. I think this actually allows for a much more dynamic approach to look at a wide range of kids and challenging them. That's my perspective. So I don't know if any of you have a thought about that. It's a great question.
That was a very deliberate aspect of when we developed this position, this role. We heard the example of how this created an opportunity to revisit slope on the math side. So with this approach, we're able to provide more practice with concepts for those students who need more, but it also opens the door for really taking these concepts beyond what what might have been the base expectation for those students who are able to expand on. So that was very intentional, actually.
Thank you. I like when we can share all of that, because I know that has been a concern for some folks. So it's nice to be able to let everyone know that it does indeed do what we would like it to do. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next is our financial update. Mrs. Nichols and Dr. Lisi, if you'd like to lead this, do you want me to put that up, or do you want me to do that, or Dr. Lisi, you're going to do that? I guess you're going to do that.
Yep, I can do that. No problem. Sorry. Mrs. Nichols, are you on? You're going to take this, or?
Can you make it a little larger, please, if possible? And maybe you can't.
No, not at this point. Sorry.
All right. Thank you.
I'm not sure if Mrs. Nichols is on. No, so I'll go ahead and I can do this. Mrs. Nichols, if you come on, we can certainly chime in and correct me.
I just had an opportunity to see it today. I couldn't access the board docs at the end of last week.
Okay.
So I didn't know whether you had a chance to review this.
So Dr. Lisi, can you summarize what you have here?
Sure, happy to do that. Sure. So this is November. This is our budget summary ending in November. So about 30 days behind typically with our summaries. But just to give you a basic overview, we're in line with where we were last year. You'll notice there's some variation there in certain lines, and that's mostly due, and we've expressed this before, mostly due to the fact that our federal COVID stimulus funds are being expended in certain areas, and the revenues are not reflective of that. So you'll see some variation in, for example, supplies and contractual supplies and other. So that's where you'll see the difference in our expenditures. Aside from that, again, we're in line. You'll probably see a bit more variation in December, but just because we've been allocating to certain lines and have been working the COVID federal stimulus money into our budget. And Kathy, if you have comments from that point, I welcome them. Very good. Any questions?
In the December report, are we going to be able to have that for the second meeting in January or not? I know that.
I believe so. That's the plan at this point.
Right, because there's a lag. So we'll be able to do the December report. That'll get us up to speed again and back on track with our monthly reports.
Correct.
So the good news is it looks like our year-to-date percent of the budget is very much in line where we were in the prior year at this time. So we're fairly consistent, 31.49% to 31.41%.
Correct.
Yeah. Any questions? As always, if you have any questions about any of the budget pieces that are in your backup and all of that, please reach out to Ms. Nichols, Dr. Lisi, or myself. We can do that. And obviously, we're heading into budget season. So just to kind of an addendum to this, the governor should be, I think by statute, has to announce by the 21st of January, I believe it is, that we should be seeing the executive budget. She did do the state of the state a couple of weeks ago, and I sent you information with respect to that. There was some emphasis on pre-K education in particular and some other areas. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's in that budget allocation. Obviously, one of the things that as a school district and board, we need to be looking for the follow-up to last year, where that promise towards 100% in our foundation aid. And right now, if you remember at the end of last year, right around 91%. So one would be expecting somewhere, because it's over the next 2 years, so we'd expect somewhere in the 4.5% range, roughly. We've been bringing this up. I didn't get to participate today, but I did get to participate in the Senator Mayor lobbying day just about a week ago. I know there was one today. I had an appointment that I was in that conflicted. But the emphasis is on the importance of making sure that foundation aid is followed through upon. Also, just a general awareness about the importance of ensuring that we're being sustainable and capacity building with our federal funds, all of those kinds of things, but also making sure, like, debt limit in New York State for small cities in particular is a significant issue. And so I think I found our lobbying session very good with Senator Mayer. I know, Ms. Griffin, you were on that call as well. But over the coming weeks, I mean, today is the 11th. So in the next 10 days, we should be seeing from the governor. I don't know if we'll have it by our budget workshop next week, which was really focusing on the budget parameters and making sure we have those established. But by our next board meeting on the 26th, we should be, or rather 25th, we should be, we should actually be using that meeting to actually summarize what did we receive, where are we at with the first blush. We know that's always the first blush. I'm wondering if more will be in the first blush than we normally see in the first blush. And
we were told today that they are anticipating we'll have the governor's budget on Tuesday.
Oh, so
that's the expectation in Albany right now.
That's great. Very
Brian,
good. Yes.
Our meeting is next Tuesday, correct, for the budget?
Correct. Budget workshop is next Tuesday.
Are we a workshop? Are we gonna, I should have asked this priorly, I'm sorry. Are we going to have a committee like we did last year with outside with the public? And
yes, we are. And I believe I don't have our budget calendar right in front of me. I believe it's February 1st. I think it's a week after that other meeting. It's on the opposite meetings a week. So I believe on our budget calendar, I believe it's, if my memory serves me, I believe it's February 1st, whatever that Tuesday is. And I know Jean's been working at assembling that team. Is that correct, Ms. Perry? Yep. So we've been doing that.
Thanks.
Yep. You're very welcome. Other questions? I wanted to add, because I just want to anticipate. And as you've seen, please watch your daily updates. Things I always am forwarding things from NISBA and NISCA's, which is the Superintendent's Association. NISBA is obviously the Boards Association, and rural schools, which brings a very unique perspective as well. So I've been sharing theirs as well. So it's very interesting when you see different perspectives on how they're interpreting it, because they draw perspectives you may not draw that each of the others might. So you really have a nice holistic perspective, and obviously small cities. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge small cities in that as well. So you'll be seeing information as we get it, which really helps us digest what we're going to be seeing in the coming weeks and months. Any questions? Alrighty. And then finally, with the COVID testing and the protocols, obviously, if you've been watching the news, Mr. Cordone alluded to it earlier, the guidance changes. We had a Merry Christmas on Christmas Eve guidance that came out on the 24th. We had some more that happened during the week of break. And then I believe it was January 6th, we got some more. We've been getting it and on a daily basis. In fact, in preparation for putting together our family and staff communications that went out in the last couple of days, those actually changed. We had final documents, I think, once or twice, Ms. Geithner, and unfortunately, we had to make adjustments because literally they changed. They said we're to the point where we have to date and time them so people know when that information is out. So as a district, we've been trying to provide accurate and timely information. There's nothing more frustrating out there. And I think what you'll find with our guidance, and we've been sharing that with you, and I'll have Ms. Geithner highlight that in just a moment. We try to simplify it. I share it with other superintendents, other districts, and the comment off was, how did you make it so simple? And so, because what we found is we're having trouble digesting and understanding it. And there's so much information that everybody is seeing, whether it's in the news, whether they're going and finding the information themselves. It's a lot. And if you don't have a Mr. Els or a Ms. Geithner who sit with us and really digest it left, right, and then we really debrief on it all the time to see if it's working, is it making sense for us as a learning community. So we try to simplify as much as possible. I want to talk, before I hand it over to Jerry, just to highlight some things. Earlier in the meeting, Ms. Lyons had a question about staffing. She early on in the meeting had a question. I said I was going to come back to it. It's each and every day. We don't know what that's going to look like. I want to give some facts. Facts, for example, are substitutes have always been a challenge in our district. Before COVID, we often had between 6 and 8 open vacancies on any given day. And our supervisors and administrators, directors have always done an outstanding job working to make sure those were always covered. Now you come into COVID, and in some cases, we have less substitutes available on some days with COVID, the way it's kind of transpired. But individuals, retirees who may have been a part of that pool in the past, may be choosing not to work. The college students were a blessing. Before the break, we had a lot of our graduates actually subbing in classrooms, which was an outstanding resource that we had and appreciated that happening. But on any given day, we don't know what happens. So, for example, any department could be impacted. So, before break for about a week and a half, we were hit pretty good in our school nutrition program, and we were able to continue our nutrition program. Without our nutrition program, we wouldn't be open. We couldn't feed children. So that's a great example where we thought out of the box. We moved the puzzle pieces around. There were some aides that helped out one day. I mean, we really got creative, and I want to thank everybody who was part of that type of solution. This morning on the drive in, I was driving in. It was I left the house about 5:30. Wanted to check out the weather on the way in to make sure that everything was looking all right. And as I was coming across the bridge on the way into Fulton, my phone rang, and I was informed at about 10 of 6 that we may have a transportation problem this morning with a group of drivers out at the last minute. And result was about 5 minutes later, a conference call from the car, and with Golden Sun and Pat, of course, and Al, and they're like, we're ready to go. We're green lights. And we did pretty well this morning. We would have been delayed a little bit because of the snow and the slippery conditions. And we did pretty well this morning, being able to make that happen with sub drivers and whatnot. This is what we do. And I don't want to make it sound, somebody said it's all sunshine. Yeah, we like to celebrate the things that are going on. But our administrators, directors, and supervisors are really thinking out of the box. Our teachers, our staff, our entire staff is really being flexible, and we're working through it. It's not necessarily COVID cases of staff. It could be COVID cases in their families. It could be I have dental appointments or medical appointments or other kinds of things. There's a variety of different things that can happen on any given day. Today, If you watch the news this morning, the curveball was south of 30 when it was south of 31's turn to get some of the weather today. So you had some school closings, you had some school delays. We have staff that lives in all of those different places. The result was we had, as we always do, an increase due to childcare. Just because of that, we were able to make that happen and be here today. So those are the kinds of things. We're really stretching the resources. We understand that a safe environment and a safe in-person learning is the best learning environment. We continue to closely monitor the data. Most of our student ones tend to be linked back to events that we can actually draw to, outside of school hours, not necessarily anything to do with us. And we have there's runs in families, as we've all probably experienced. If one person in our family gets it, you often see, a domino effect. I mean, a ripple effect out. So it's all of those things together. It's not one thing, it's many. And that's what I want to put out there, that we're working, pretty much 24/7 and 7 days a week, as every district, is doing, trying to ensure that we're safe first and making sure, obviously, that next piece is that in-person learning, because we know that, and that could always happen. And that's a reminder that we've continued to put on every document that we have out there. My team reminded me, this morning as I was reflecting on my phone call, when we were working through, was that what we recognized was the fact that we've done this 3 times this year. We had to pivot GRB, we had to pivot Granby, and we had to pivot, what's the third one? Granby, there's one other one I'm forgetting here. And then there's 3 schools that we've pivoted, junior high. Those are the 3 schools we've pivoted, and the feedback we got was we did all right. So we've been able to do that. We've had classrooms go to remote where we've had contacts. So I think those are pieces. The other piece is, we had 10-day quarantine. A week ago, we were dealing with 10-day quarantines. Now we're dealing with 5-day quarantines. So now, once we had stuff set, we kind of could take a deep breath and kind of get it set. Now with 5 days, it changes the speed and anticipation. So Jerry, could you talk a little bit about our guidance? But I wanted to acknowledge the fact that our teams, our faculty and our staff and our administrators, our directors, our supervisors, our principals are doing an outstanding job taking all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and making it what we are as a learning community. So Jerry.
Sure. I will share the document that I think hopefully simplifies this for our staff. And there's a similar document that we shared with families for students. And this is basically how we've articulated to our school community the change between the 10-day quarantine and isolation and the current 5-day. So we learned about day 0. So day 0 begins if you are COVID positive. Day 0 is the day that you first develop symptoms, or the first day of your positive test if you're asymptomatic. So from day 1 through 5, then you are required to isolate. For our procedures for return to work, because isolation and quarantine both, even though they've been shortened, can continue to be extended through that 10th day, depending on how the person is doing, how they're feeling, and their status with symptoms. So on day 5, we ask our staff to contact either Chris or myself, and we just run through a very brief protocol assessing how they're doing with their symptoms. So to return to work, if you've been isolated, you've been COVID positive, on that 6th day, you can return if you have no symptoms or if your symptoms are resolving. And specifically, they're looking for fever-free without medication for 24 hours, no runny nose, and no more than a minimal non-productive cough. And the reason those last 2 symptoms are included is because part of the return to work or the return to school protocol is being able to wear a well-fitting disposable face mask that covers your mouth and nose consistently for the next 5 days. So if you have a runny nose or a cough, unfortunately wearing a mask, you'll have to take it down, you'll have to remove it. So those 2 symptoms can't be present in order to return to work or school after an isolation. Similarly, on the quarantine side, day 0 becomes the the last day of exposure to the positive person. Days 1 through 5 would be the days that you quarantine. Again, if you're a staff member in our district, you're going to contact Mr. Ells or myself. We're going to run you through that brief protocol. We're going to, on both cases of isolation and quarantine, we ask you to acknowledge that you understand and can follow the return to work, which is maintaining distance, wearing your mask appropriately, and making sure that you're eating and drinking at least 6 feet apart from others. So that in a nutshell is the summary of our new 5-day shortened isolation and quarantine protocol.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Geithner. I appreciate that. Mr. Ells isn't with us tonight because he's actually making calls. So that's what he's doing this evening. Ms. Geithner said she could do that summary for us today. So I like to lean on either Jerry or on Mr. Ells when we're doing that. They know this so well. I think the other piece that I believe came up at the last meeting is the test to stay. We're still exploring that. You know, one of the questions or one of the points our board often talks about is when you do something, can you maintain the capacity and can you sustain it over time? And that's one of the questions that, you know, with test to stay, we have to make sure that we have the test to do so. And, you know, so that's the real challenge. And for example, with our ID now, we've been cruising along with that and doing that. We're getting rave reviews on that. And all of a sudden we tried to stay at least 300 to 500 ahead. And all of a sudden for the first time, they want to ration us with respect to, you know, not being able to fulfill the whole order. So this goes back into that full testing. So if you remember, we've had right along, I've been having a multiple testing kind of approach to all of this. And so it's poised us in the right position and given us some flexibility. But I want to say that that's part of the issue is that, you know, you have to have the tests. So, this morning we got another allocation. I haven't seen the amount from the state, but it's nothing like the 3,200, that we got a couple of weeks ago that we did with our sharing and availability to parents, a much smaller amount today. And the question is, will that be there in a week, or 2 weeks? And 800 tests sounds great. We have 3,200 children, we've got 700 staff, so, when you hear that test, one of the things that we were talking about in a meeting was that in this county, you need somewhere in the vicinity, minimum 45,000 tests a month, maximum 90,000 tests a month. So think about that, quantify that, that's what we're dealing with. So it gets back to capacity. So it comes full circle to what Jerry mentioned in that presentation of the quarantine and isolation, those mitigating factors, the mask wearing appropriately, the staying home when you're sick. We seem to still see that. I think we're getting better and better at that. But, I know for the first 30 years of my career, I'm in my 32nd, but first 30, I only missed 3 or 4 days. And so I know I came to sick, you're not feeling as well as I probably should have when I came to school. And that's a mindset change for a lot of people. So I think that's a hard piece for families. It's hard for families sometimes to keep kids home. And we know that was always a case. So there are so many factors. And as educators, we want to be with our kids, and I get that. So I think all of those pieces, there's that balance. That's why that testing center is so important for us to get those more immediate results. So I think we've set ourselves up in a lot of different ways. But, again, one of the things I've tried to be is it's reality based. I often get really positive and upbeat, and I'm excited, about all the things that we offer. At the same time, I wanted to make sure people understand the reality of what we're dealing with and how hard all members of our community and the support that we're getting from our families. And I know there's frustration and, but the importance of treating each other with respect and dignity and understand. I had a terrific call with a parent before the board meeting today. Any parent that emails me, I try to call them. Because I think I can't put in words what I can say and have a dialogue with. And it was just a terrific, I end up those conversations in the end feeling very good. So again, that's how granular I want to get and what I've been doing. But I think it's important that that's a reminder, because we've had challenges around that, the challenges across the country that you read around, school districts and what we're trying to reinforce and enforce and what's and what can happen. So again, it's something we're working on each and every day, and it takes all of us in the entire community working together, and we're going to beat this thing. And together is where we're going to do it. I think back early on, and I'm going to end with saying one of the first placards I remember right at the beginning was Fulton Strong. And I remember that. And if there's something that I've learned here in Fulton more than anything is when we stick together, we can accomplish pretty much anything here in the Fulton City School District. And I've seen it, and I know we're gonna get through this thing and starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. And so there's my positive upbeat tonight, and my request and plea for, we're all in this together. We don't necessarily all agree, but we can respect one another and make this thing happen for the best interest of our kids. So with that, Mr. Griffin, that's the conclusion of my report.
Well, to your point, Brian, about tests, I just would remind all of us that we went months early on when we didn't have the tests. We waited to get the tests. And right. I think that's going to be a cyclical problem going forward, because we got them, we started, we're using them up, and so the orders are going in. So I think at the same time, the federal government has ordered a large number. So,
Ryan, I know in Onondaga County, they are not requiring schools to contact trace any longer. And it looks like, from my role, I see that families will test and report at will. And I'm assuming that Oswego County will be there if they're not already. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, a couple of our districts are in multiple counties. So they often share what they're doing. I will say, Onondaga County, the guidance seems very good. They shared some of it. He always shares it with us. It was very good. I saw a very nice table today that seemed kind of nice, really describing all of this stuff that Jerry described this evening. But yeah, we've heard, again, that they're not, but when we've talked to them, we still need to be looking into it. You're right. They're not requiring necessarily the tracing. But obviously we're trying to keep an eye on that, because if there's a close contact, we want to make sure that that's there. We have found recently, for example, where kids may have been at the same function, we're seeing that a couple of them may have been positive in that same. That's a way that we're keeping an eye on those bigger rocks. But you're correct. I mean, that's the direction that right now they were so inundated and so far behind. I think this is what's happened. It started at the New York State level, county levels. But yes, that's kind of where we're at. And we're trying to work through that, as well. But yes, that is the official guidance.
So we're still contact tracing, but I guess my point is that it seems we're shifting to rely more on parents to share, to test, and to share those results. And I guess I'm wondering, if we're not there yet in Fulton, will we be, to your perception?
I think we're working toward that, Mr. Corda. I agree with you, Dave. We're working toward that. I think when the state about 3 weeks ago, around Christmas time, whatever that, the 24th, I think it was, that's when they had indicated that at-home tests could be accepted if we could agree, if we could confirm the fidelity to all aspects that it was a good test. And then what was it? 2 weeks later, they announced or was putting out there that now, as you just said, that home tests could be taken and they could self-report using that attestation form, fill out a form. I know Onondaga has it online. We're still trying to get there. I know one of our districts gave them a template and provided it, willing to do it. So I think we're one step away from that. So if Brian Palvino's household took a home test, we could go online at Onondaga right now and actually report that we had a positive in our house. And then the expectation also is that they're supposed to be letting anybody they were in contact with know that they're positive. That's the other part of it, which again, how can you expect somebody or require somebody to be able to do that? But I think we're about one step behind, right? I think right now with the guidance so fast, we're trying to take it in a measured way to make sure that, we want to wrap our head around every positive. I think that's right now making sure that we know who's dealing with this. and then making sure that our protocol for the return at 5 days. So right now, those are required phone calls with Ms. Geithner and Mr. Els, depending on which part of our faculty and staff they are. And then for students, is it contacting through our testing center person, Jerry? Is that what it is?
Correct.
As for our students to come back through, as was in our guidance.
And how are we managing staff that might be residing in another county? Is there communication there, or how is it been working?
Yep. So that works pretty well. Chris and I get an encrypted message. There's a handful of, you're probably the same tracers that you have, that we get a direct email from them identifying anybody that's positive that's been identified to the Department of Health. So anybody that goes, we get an email with the date that it starts and the date that their 5 days would be over was the 10.
And I think one of the things that has streamlined this for our staff is the availability of the COVID testing center for symptomatic testing. So we're getting those results directly, as opposed to having to go through a health department or a WellNow or an urgent care. And so that has been a terrific benefit that the district has been able to support for our students and for our staff.
The key will be the capacity. We were way out in front. Nobody else was using it. So, and nobody else that I know of, any school districts. Unfortunately, we're competing with Walgreens and some of these other companies, unfortunately, now.
Our Lanigan, if you go there, it has to be a staff member or someone that goes to a school. It couldn't be a family member that, okay.
No, because we're going to be stretching these tests as it was. We have 700 in our hands, but unfortunately, I'd love to have 700 on their way. So unfortunately.
And has the federal funding been supportive enough in those situations for folks that have had to take COVID leave? Are we finding it's adequate? Are we finding that the parameters meet the need?
Jerry, do you want to speak to that? It's your realm.
It's hard to say. We are testing pretty high rates based on the capacity that we have available, I guess, is what I can say to that. Most of our appointments are filled. Could we fill more? I can't say. I have not heard that people have not been able to get appointments with our testing center, but I don't have that specific information.
And the COVID leave, Jerry, I know that's a question that was part of Dave's question.
Yeah. The COVID leave piece definitely is a concern among our staff, especially as, it is a one incident-based amount of leave. So for up to 14 days, it can be extended up to 2 times based on the current guidance we have from New York State, but that 2 times has to be connected. So for example, if I am quarantined because of an exposure, my COVID leave would cover that quarantine. If during my quarantine, I myself tested positive, my quarantine then gets extended because now I'm in isolation. COVID leave covers that extension. If my medical provider says I'm not well enough to come out of isolation, or I'm still exhibiting significant symptoms and my isolation gets extended, COVID leave would cover that 3rd time. Under the current guidance from the Department of Labor, it's no more than 2 extensions. So if then I recover, 2 months later, I'm exposed again, and I get COVID a 2nd time, that there's not COVID leave available to me because I've used my allotted time.
Is there any opportunity for appeal there?
Appeal? I haven't had
for more time.
I haven't had that experience. Family medical leave might come into play in some of these situations. Contractual paid leave certainly is available to individuals who need.
I'm just wondering, without tapping into their personally accrued time.
Right now,
one of the things we're doing, it's a great question, Dave. I think one of the things I'm always doing is trying to learn what other school districts are doing, because oftentimes you'll hear that school district A does something different than B, C, D, and E. That's why I keep my ear to the ground, just hearing. I love hearing what's going on in Onondaga County schools, so I can understand to see if there's something we should do different. I'm not remiss in trying to steal great ideas. So in this area, obviously I know that different bargaining units have some concerns about this. Jerry and I have talked about that. Obviously Fulton, we're rule followers, and we will maximize what the laws say. We also understand that this is unique time. So anytime I've asked the bargaining is that I'm open to seeing. Let's see what else is out there to see if it's something that could be considered. So,
well, I will just say, if I may, before I finish, that the educators I know in that area are looking to Fulton, and they're commenting, and even to me, because they know I'm on the board, and they're complimentary of the leadership they're seeing. So I just want to pass that along. I think that people are looking at you as well.
Well, thank you.
Can you explain exactly what the COVID leave entails?
So under the current New York State law, an individual is eligible for up to 14 days of paid leave without using their accrued leave for isolation or quarantine of themselves. So again, it is the duration of the isolation or the quarantine up to 14 days. So again, with shortened isolation and quarantine, I'm anticipating we're going to get some clarifying guidance about that. Prior to January 1st of 2021, there was federal relief that extended COVID leave further and under additional circumstances, like if your child's school or daycare were closed, for example, you were eligible for paid COVID leave under the federal law at that time. That expired on December 31st of 2020. So, we're again, the guidance evolves and changes, and here we are with new quarantine and isolation guidelines, and I am not really clear how that will impact COVID leave moving forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a quick question. So I know after our holiday break that there was an opportunity for teachers to get COVID tested, and I was wondering if that option could be encouraged among students. I do know that there was COVID tests handed out to students within the last couple of weeks, and I was just wondering if we could encourage, after like holiday breaks or events where we know that students could be introduced to COVID, that we could encourage the idea to get tested to kind of cut down on spreading in school.
It's a great idea, Reagan. It gets back to the capacity. If Brian Polvino had a perfect world, he'd have 5 tests a week available for every single person who steps inside this district. I mean, that's in the perfect world. I would say that, knock on wood, we have not seen the spread, in our schools. We've been watching this data for, what is it now, 20 months, 21 months, something like that now. We really have had isolated cases of that, which is good. Not that I want any. So we need to continue to watch that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we're looking at. We were looking at dates of stuff, that testing that we have availability. Make sure that we get it out there, that we have, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, I think if we got a quarter of what we got the other day, we should have gotten 800 more this morning, which sounds like a lot. But how do we creatively use it? That's what I hear you saying, Reagan. How do we creatively use the resources that we've got? At the same time, make sure we got enough resources to keep, the district running to do the testing that we have to do. So it's a delicate balance about rolling the dice, if you will, one way, and then, ending up with something else. I mean, if you told me 4 months ago we'd be sitting here in this kind of data, I'd be like, I probably would have been wrong. I don't think I would have expected it as high as it is, but as a region, but it's a great point. Thank you.
And we still do have COVID tests available in our schools for students or families who were unable to pick them up at our distribution. So if you haven't yet received one, we still do have one per student available, and you just need to call your school's main office to make arrangements to get that test kit.
That was a great infomercial, Ms. Geithner. Thank you. Compliments of Ms. LePage. So thank you. I'm all set, Ms. Griffin. That's the conclusion of the superintendent's report. If there's no other questions, great dialogue this evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving along, item number 4.01, financial reports.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
Yes.
Mrs. Albagore,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
and Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
All righty. Item 4.02, accept donations.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? I'd just like to say thank you. Donations are always appreciated, and it's nice to have that community support. Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
Yes.
Mrs. Albagore,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
and Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
Item 4.03, approve the disposal of surplus property.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
Yes.
Mrs. Albagore,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
and Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
First reading of policies, and what we have is one policy that was added for cooperative purchasing. And Superintendent Polvino, would you like to speak to this for a moment?
Muted.
Can't hear you.
I got it.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So yes, with respect to the cooperative purchasing, we needed to add piggybacking as an option, piggyback contracting. So what that is existing contracts that have already been bid in the past, gone through all of the processes. What you have to have is a policy that's in place to be able to do that. Our attorneys, that was a recommendation from King and King as well as LaChase. We went, if you go back to in the fall, we looked at different turf companies. We're going to be going with the same turf that we have. And to be able to assure that, the best way to do that is to go through piggybacking. And the costs actually look like they're coming in. And again, I don't want to mark what it was, but I think we're coming in about $300,000 to $400,000 low. So we're definitely within budget in that process. The piggybacking, this just reinforces what the laws are, the municipal laws. So we're piggybacking on existing processes that are already there, which is very legal. The key is that you have to meet all the expectations. The first is to have a policy that indicates that the board has a policy indicating they support piggybacking. Our cooperative purchasing policy, which was 6730, didn't specifically talk about that. So our attorneys at the Ferrara firm, in most districts, you don't have to go through and get those. I wanted to make sure, because this is my first foray into the capital improvement project process and our first foray in piggybacking. So I want to make sure that we went with the letter of the law. So the first thing that they pointed out, they reviewed our policies in the last couple of days. It really came through when we were doing the bids as a kind of an outlier of the bids that got picked up in there, that we were looking at the piggybacking. So that's what evolved over the last couple of days. So the attorneys did that. So the recommendation is what you see is I provided you the redlined copy as well as a final version of what that would look like. Tonight would be the first reading. We have a policy committee on the 18th, 19th. We have a policy committee. I will share that with them. Generally, this is straight from our attorneys. Generally, when it's really flat, it's what's required by law that we have to have in place. So but I will bounce that off. And then if there's any feedback from that night, I know there are representatives from the board that serve on that policy committee, and we'll also on Thursday, if there's any discussion that comes out of that, I will share that and convey that to the board. The other parts are that they checked the contracts that were existing to make sure that those contracts had everything that they needed to have, making sure that, so that's the second part of just requiring the initial contract that they've been that those are there. The initial contract was advertised. Did they follow all the steps? Yes. In the case we have, the fourth part, are they available to other governmental entities? The answer is yes. The award to the lowest responsible bidder, the answer is yes. Our attorneys went back, they confirmed that, checked, did their research on that. And finally, on requirement 6, which was the other piece, our architects have to file a certification that all the aspects of our project align with what's in those projects, which they do. But our King is going to be certifying that. So on the 25th, if everything comes up, which I anticipate that it will, because I've verbally been told, but they're going through the certification process now. On the 25th, we would pass those resolutions to follow the piggybacking, allow us to purchase the turf, and our goal would be installation starting at the end of June.
So the goal here is at the next meeting that we'll be able to pass this policy if everything goes well with the policy committee.
That's correct.
That is the goal.
Yeah, that meets one of the requirements we have to have in place to be able to use this process.
Yes, so that we can move forward on purchasing.
That's
so
correct.
are there any questions? All right.
Just a point of process. So the policy committee is recommending to the board, right?
So this is a recommendation from our attorney that's on here. I'll take it to the
Right.
policy committee. Generally in the past, it has not gone to the policy committee yet because we just found out over the weekend and into today or yesterday, what's today, Tuesday, into yesterday, that we need to adjust the policy. Generally,
Correct.
what's happened, Mr. Cordone, when we have policy, and I'm sure you've served on, many policy committees, generally when there's straight boilerplate language of the law, there's really been no feedback from as far as any adjustments from the policy committee, but we will run it by them as part of the process as well.
And to revise my last comment, it's your recommendation, but you think that the policy committee will support that?
I would anticipate so because it's alignment, it's direct verbiage, and that's been consistent with policy committee for my 4 or 5 years here, 5 years now. That recommendation from our attorney generally has been very well received.
It's required language from the attorney. So I think he's got a good idea that it will be accepted. I would agree. For that reason, because the attorneys were involved.
Great.
It's a good question.
Anything else with this? All right. Item 6.01, Committee on Special Education.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
Yes.
Mrs. Albagor,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
and Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
With your agreement, I would ask if you'd like to batch items 7.01 through 7.12, all personnel items.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
Yes.
Mrs. Albagor,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
and Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
All right, this brings us to board forum. And Reagan, would you like to kick us off?
I would love to.
Great.
I'd like to thank everybody for their presentations. I thought they all were very interesting, especially the instructional coaches and what they had to say. I thought that was really, really cool. And I'd also like to thank clerical and aides. I know for me, the first person I see walking into school are our aides who stand outside. And it does not matter the weather. They're always outside saying like hello. And in the coldest weather, they're smiling. And it's really nice to see that first thing in the morning. So from a student, I'd like to thank them. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Reagan, I'm sure that means a lot coming from a student. I'm sure that will touch their hearts when they hear that. Jen.
I'm going to piggyback right off of Reagan. I'd like to thank the clerical and teacher aides too. Those clerical people, they, in all of my experiences, they run the school. Without them, holy mackerel, like it could be detrimental. So thank you for that. And those teachers aides for being there just to pick up the day-to-day pieces to ensure that each day goes smoothly for our students. You're the oil to the many squeaky wheels that we encounter every single day. And just to make the place run smooth is not, we don't always thank you, but it is so appreciated. And we appreciate you very much. So thank you for that.
Very good. Mr. Crandall.
Oh, I'd like to thank everyone, and especially Jean, because I think she's the only one that can keep her thumb on Brian at times. And I think we're doing a good job with everything, and that's it.
Thank you. Brenda.
I just want to send out a special thank you to the clerical and to our aides. Like Ms. Mainville said, it wouldn't run without some of those people. They really are the glue that helps us when things are going down. So I really appreciative to both of those groups. Thank you for the COVID update. There's always a lot being thrown at us. It's very confusing at times. So I appreciate all that you and Jerry do and Mr. Els to keep us informed on what's going on in our district with that. It was very interesting listening to our instructional coaches tonight. What they're doing with the kids, it sounds fun. It sounds engaging, and it was really good to hear the excitement that the two of them had while they were sharing with us. So I'm confident that our students are doing well as well. And with that, that will be it.
Thank you. Dave.
Just additionally, I wanted to thank Brian for the update on the bus drivers this morning and how things are being covered there. I think that folks don't even realize outside of the classroom the impact of the pandemic, and especially on our bus drivers. So I'm grateful for that update to know that all aspects of the organization are being covered, and that's it.
Thank you. Jess.
Sorry, I couldn't get my microphone to go off. Yes, just a special thank you to Dan's team for the presentation today. I think that instructional coaches are a little bit of a hot topic, so it was good to kind of hear the things that they're doing and, you know, that they're being used to their fullest extent. And thank you to everyone. I know that we've had a lot of people on the team helping out in places that they normally wouldn't be. So thanks for that, and not anything else to add.
Thank you. Lynn.
I think everybody's covered almost everything. I do want to take a minute just to thank everybody involved in the transparency of our district. On a daily basis, there's updates for everybody to understand what's going on, what has happened, and I appreciate that. I have many people that do ask me questions, and I can also say to them, go right on the site. You can find any answers to any of the questions you have to ask me. Can't thank the aides and clerical enough. Jean, thank you so much. You keep us all in line, and that's so much appreciated. Tonight I was going to ask Dan when he started out with his presentation about innovations, but boy, those two girls answered that real quick. And I thought it was really, really informative. So thank you, everybody.
All right. And I don't normally do this, but Molly, I'm going to ask you, because when we're virtual, it's like you're at the table with us. So I'd like to just ask if you have anything you want to share.
I just think that everybody did a really, really great job on their presentations. I do really appreciate all the aids and everything. I also see aides at the front door, and there's this really nice one that always says good morning to me, and it makes my day. So,
well, I'm sure you are yet another student that is going to make their day when they hear that they have students that appreciate them. And again, thank you for all the reports. Special thanks. Clerical people and aides. Jean Perry, you're my right arm. She helps me make sure that the meeting comes off smoothly, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for that assistance. If I have a question, she's great about getting me the answer or pointing me in the right direction. Aides and clerical staff, you folks are the glue. They really are the glue to holding the day together. And someone mentioned it. You can find them sometimes doing performing tasks that they don't normally do. They very quickly change up and go where they're needed, and whatever it takes to get the school day rolling for the kids and to keep things moving. And we just, again, can't say enough good things about those folks. We don't always make their days easy. The instructional coaches brought a lot of excitement tonight, which makes me glad, because if they bring that level of excitement to us, then, that's great for our kids. And that's what I and everyone, I know that's what we want for our kids. So I appreciate the report. Appreciate you brought folks that are on the front line dealing with this to explain exactly what our staff is doing these days. And they're doing things a lot different than they were done in my day when I was a kid in school. And I got to tell you, it's pretty exciting stuff. So I don't have anything else this evening. With that, I'm going to ask the board to move item 8.02 so we can go into an executive session.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mrs. Mainville.
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Mrs. Alvagore.
Yes.
Mr. Crandall.
Yes.
Mr. Cordone.
I can't hear you, Dave.
That was a yes. I was muted. Sorry.
Okay. And Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
Thank you. So is a 5-minute break enough, folks? Okay, 5 minutes. We're going to come back to those that are viewing. I want to thank you in advance in case you decide not to come back. We're going to take care of some business in executive session. We will return to public session to close the meeting. And again, if you joined us this evening, this board is grateful for that fact. We really appreciate the interest that you take in what's going on in our district. Stay well, everyone. I'll see the rest of you in 5 minutes.
Good to go.
All right, we're back in public session, returning from our executive session. And at this point in time, I would ask someone to move our final resolution 8.03 to adjourn the meeting.
Move it.
Second.
Okay.
Who was it that moved it? Who was
Yeah.
first? Lynn. Okay.
You got that, Brenda, the second too?
Yep.
Good, Brenda. God, I love you. Any discussion on this point? All right. So I think I can see everybody. If you'd raise your hand, all those in